Today we're joined by Stuart Pearcey, who is the Provincial Communications Officer for the province of Lincolnshire. Thanks for joining me today, Stuart.
You're very welcome.
Stuart, I'd like to talk to you today about your role as a Provincial Communications Officer. And the first thing I want to know is, what the hell is a Provincial Communications Officer?
Well, it's an evolving role, frankly, and it's getting busier and busier. My predecessor was Peter Brooks, currently the APGM, and he had one or two things to do. His predecessor was a guy called Charles Board, who passed the job on with a ring binder with 2 pieces of A4 paper in it. Now it's become effectively a full-time job. There's always something to do with the growth of social media, printed media, all the ways we can talk to people. Really important that we're on top of all of those as much as we can be. So it's evolving, developing, and very, very busy.
How did you get the role in the first place?
Well, there was no interview, there was no ad. I was at a social event, my wife and I, and the PGM walked past and he said, would you like to be the Provincial Communications Officer? And I said, yeah, okay. And he said, good, and walked on. And that was it. I've been doing it ever since.
And what did the boss lady say?
She said, oh, and that's fine. And she's quite happy about that.
And it's a collared role, and
it is. I was dubious about that in the first instance when there was discussion of it being a collared role, because I'm very frightened of the fact that the messenger might become more important than the message. Whilst everybody should know the PCO is, he's not more important than what he's trying to tell you.
What does a collared role actually mean to those people that might not know what it means?
You're listed in the provincial yearbook. There's a collar to be worn. You're listed if it's a lodge office. You're listed in the list of officers within the summons, within all the records. It's a recognition of the role.
And you see that, by the way you've said, is that that's evolved over the years from a ring binder to now basically almost a full-time job. Would you say that the way you throw, and I know you throw yourself into this, do you think and I know you should never compare yourself against others, but do you think there are other PCOs out there that probably don't throw themselves into it as much as you?
I don't know, really. I'm not sufficiently experienced in what they all do to understand, but I guess they're all driven by something similar to what drives me, which is kind of fear of failure, really.
When you say fear of failure, is that almost an imposter syndrome that you have?
Oh, yeah. No doubt about that whatsoever.
Okay, and where does that fear come from?
I don't know. I've grown up with it, I suppose, over the years.
You have a background in journalism and copywriting.
I do.
Do you think that's vital for the role?
Not necessarily, so long as you've got access to it somewhere, as long as somebody can turn a paragraph.
Or you've got ChatGPT, so.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we can always use that. Yeah, you've got to make something that's engaging. So many people, even in the corporate world, you'll see things from large companies that employ people and pay them large sums of money that say, on the 17th of February last year, we told you X. And then they go on for 3 or 4 paragraphs, and all of a sudden you get to the meat of the story about what's happening now. Nobody can explain to them later on what happened a month ago. Tell them now what's new.
What do you wish, and again, each lodge is its own legal entity and its own constituent, but what would you hope lodges would do better and also stop or reduce when it comes to their own lodge communications?
They should tell each other more. I mean, you'll hear the phrase in Freemasonry, and that's what Freemasonry is all about. I would venture to suggest that the most important thing, the thing that Freemasonry really is about, is communication. Because nothing happens without it. From the sending out of a lodge summons, to a phone call to an almoner, to a charity steward. That's all communication. It's all about telling the story in one way or another. It's what brings us together. And it's important that we recognise all of that. So people should tell us more. And we're doing that. We're doing that far more than we used to. Let me give you an example. When people have been in Freemasonry for a long time, when they've done 50 or 60 years, they're presented with a certificate. Now, people used to be presented with a certificate, and that was that. hurrah, thank you very much for your service, and you can hang that on the wall. Now, lodges are more keen to tell me that that's happening, and I get pictures coming through, and we hear all sorts of interesting stories about these guys who've had such fascinating lives, who've done really interesting things, and supported Freemasonry, and in effect, carried it forward for the rest of us.
It's interesting you use the word stories. What, and you know, Freemasonry is primarily made up of stories, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Why are stories so important when communicating?
Why, still, well, unless you've got a story, you haven't got anything to tell, have you?
That's
really?
correct.
There's a bit of a, perhaps almost a mismatch in that Freemasonry is built on these traditions going back more than 300 years. But we've got to make that sit alongside the real world that people live in. And we've got to bring those two together in a way that makes them comfortable bedfellows. I mean, we talk about 1 degree ceremony. You may have spoken to other people about this, about the 3rd degree and moving on to chapter. The 3rd degree, if you want to put it in modern terms, is a bit East Endery, because there's a story told within that, and there's a murder and a manhunt, and somebody's captured, and what happens to them? Yeah, it's fantastic. Shakespearean proportions, this tragedy.
True. Really
It's true,
good.
you see, he's done it.
Yeah.
It's true. And then you move on to the chapter, which tells you another part of the story, moves it on from
We
there.
have EastEnders music in that.
You could have a duff, duff, duff moment if you wanted, Chris. You really could. You really could. But it's the more we communicate and tell people about things that they're involved in, I'll tell others that people are involved in outside of their Freemasonry, helps to bring us all together, makes us stronger.
And that's the power of social media, isn't it? The fact that we
Oh,
can tell
social
the story.
media, yeah.
Well, I tell you what. Why don't we finish finish it here now
Yeah.
and go and actually do a standalone video on social media?
Love to.
Good stuff. We'll see you on the other side.